Here's Vsauce, and he's going to tell us that this thing about existence is not about physics. It's about something he calls ontology or metaphysics or who knows what, philosophy. No, the word exist belongs exclusively to physics, but what these people start out with is with the word object is a thing. The word object, whatever an object is, whatever a thing is, does that have to do anything with philosophy, with ontology, with metaphysics? And the answer is no. It's got only to do with physics. Physics has a complete monopoly over the word object and over the word exist. Anyone touching those two words, whether they know it or not, has crossed the line into physics. Now we're talking physics. And I say, well, but I'm a philosopher. No. As soon as you cross the line, you become a physicist. And now you're talking physics. Okay, so better learn physics before you cross the line, right? Because that's what where the words object and exist belong. That's the province. The province of physics is object and exist. And so here we have Vsauce, and he's going to tell us, this is Michael from Vsauce. And again, these people, they're bean brains. They don't know anything about anything, let alone about physics. They think these words belong to philosophy. So listen to him. He's going to tell you where the subject matter belongs in.
Ontology is the philosophy of existence. The philosophy of parts and wholes is called mereology.
So what's the issue? The issue is that they get into this word called mereology. And so they're going to define the word object, which does not belong to philosophy or metaphysics or ontology. The word object belongs exclusively to physics, but they created these irrelevant categories, and they're going to, because of that, they say, well, we're going to look at what an object is made of. So an object is what it's made of. In fact, if you look it up in the Wikipedia, it'll say that, again, it's, the matter making up an object. But what is matter? It's a bunch of objects. So all they're saying is that an object is that which is made out of a bunch of objects, a bunch of matter. That's what they're saying. And so they're going to go into this nonsense about, matter coming together and forming an object. And then they call parts of whole, right? They look at a whole like, a chair, and they say, well, but a chair is made out of atoms. It's made out of wood first, and then wood is made out of atoms and or molecules, and molecules are made out of atoms, and they keep going and going and going. And so it doesn't stop because they say, well, we don't know what electrons are made of because we haven't parted them, we haven't broken the electron up, so we're still investigating. And so they never answer the question. I just want to know what a table is. I don't want to know what it's made out of. Okay, and so this is where we run into trouble with these folks. And here's one fellow who goes into this mereology, which is what things are made out of. And so he says the following. Listen to him. Here he goes. He's going to tell you about what things are made out of, because that's what he thinks that a thing is. This is what they teach.
We'll be looking at the question of things. It's kind of the most ancient form of philosophy. Essentially, it's the question of when do some things make another thing? What is the criterion that a set of things must jointly meet so that those things are themselves, but together they are also a new thing, a new object? What is it that's true of my cells that jointly they make me?
So that's essentially what these people teach. They say, look, things are made of things, and those things are also made of things. And so how do I explain what I am or who I am? Well, I have to go into what makes me, and then I got to look at what makes those things that make me, and so on down the line. It's like it never ends. And they call that mereology, and it goes on forever. They talk about parts of whole. They also talk about, time slices. You don't see the table in one go. when you look at the table, well, you look at this piece, and you scan it with your eyes because there's all this motion going on in the universe, all this time going on, all this, dynamism, all this dynamic stuff going on. Everything moves. And so they look at the observer instead of saying, look, that's a table. Instead of saying that, they say, well, I'm seeing the table. First, I see the legs of the table. Then I see the board. And then eventually I see the whole table. And so they get into these parts of whole. And they, break it up into pieces. And that's how they explain what a table is. How the observer sees it. It's just seeing and believing. It's got nothing to do with what a table is and whether a table is an object. Because, again, all objects are made of objects. That's the notion that they have. And so here you have, essentially, this is how he sees it. He says that everything is made of something. It's composed of something, right? And so he gets lost in all this stuff. He goes through this full analysis of all these little things there that you see there. What is stuff and, what it's constituted by and so on. And the funny part is, after going through all this for hours, and he has several videos, he finally ends up with this. These are the videos that he comes up with. He calls it Metaphysics, Philosophy 321. And he said, what am I, a person or an animal, or both? And he goes on to all these questions, material objects, free will and determinism, time travel. Metaphysics deals with what? What is the subject matter? This guy's all over the place, and they call it metaphysics. And just a bunch of nonsense. That's all that you're looking at there. The question is, does this belong into metaphysics? Does it belong into physics? Does it belong into, philosophy, ontology? What are we talking about here? These guys are all over the place, and it's like we cover all the bases. But, here we are 100 years later, and these people can't answer a single question. So is this philosophy, And what is philosophy? I mean, what is it? The love of wisdom, as Plato called it. So what's your degree in? I studied 10 years and I got a degree in love of wisdom. Oh, okay. I'm glad to hear that, And if you look at, this study of what an object is, they call it a study of objecthood. And look at all the nonsense they came up over the years. They created all these categories, all these specialties, all these branches, materiality and agency. What is that? Objecthood involves examining the physical properties of objects. Another one, human-object relationship, explores the relationship between humans and objects. Ontology and epistemology delves into questions of what it means for something to be an object and how we are to come to know and understand objects. Know and understand object. What the hell are these people studying? Philosophy, philosophical inquiry into objecthood, explores concepts like being, existence, and the nature of reality. So they have all these categories that they created over the years. I like next to the last one, thing theory, emphasizes the materiality of objects and their ability to resist human interpretation and control. So they have all these categories just to know what an object is. Not a single one has defined what an object is, but they have all these branches of the study of objecthood. It's actually scary, And here you have Vsauce again. He's going to tell us something about an object he calls trog, which is a tree and a dog. So you have the tree and the dog, and he calls it a trog. So what are you talking about? He's saying, well, I can create all kinds of words, combined, two objects, matter, right? Here we have a dog and a tree. They're not even attached to each other, but he says, I call it a trog. Here it is. Listen to him. He's going to justify it.
A trog is an object whose parts are a tree and whatever dog is nearest. This is its tree part, and this is its dog part. How can that be a thing? The tree and the dog aren't even connected. Well, so what? These two pieces of fabric aren't connected, and yet they are a thing called a bikini.
So he invented the word trog, and he said, we can do that with anything. We can take a rock and a tree, we can take a house and a lake, or even more objects, and we can invent words and say, that's an object, that's a thing. No, a bikini is not a thing. Okay, only in the religion of mathematics, using the mathematical method, do you arrive at such nonsense, because they haven't defined what an object is. So he can get away with that. He said, well, if an object is, what it's made out of, and it's made out of different parts, it's still an object, well, then a bikini is an object under that definition, that notion. No, bikini is not an object. Okay, bikini is a type of fabric, type of clothes maybe, right? One kind of clothes. You're comparing bikini against something else automatically. So, you can point to something and say, look, that's a rock. But if you have a yellow rock and a blue rock, and you say, well, that's a blue rock and that's a red rock, and the other one's a green one. So are they different objects because they have different colors? No, a rock is a rock and a rock. The fact that it's got different colors does not make the rock different, the word rock. And the same goes with any underwear like bikini or, brassiere. So these are different types of clothes, okay? And the fact that we use one word like bikini to name that one doesn't make it an object, like a single object. Okay, it's a relation. Okay, and so bikini is a concept; it's not an object. And so people have to be very careful in defining what an object is, because they get into all these, messy things. In fact, we're going to see that here we have Bertrand Russell, and he makes a similar error. He was a so-called philosopher, a bean brain of the early 20th century who thought he knew something about things, and he defined what a thing is, what exist means, and he failed on both of them, as everybody else did. And here it is. This is what Bertrand had to say. He says, the term object encompasses anything that can be referred to or talked about. Is that what an object is? Well, not for the purposes of physics, because I can talk about motion. I can use it as a subject of a sentence in ordinary speech, but motion is not an object, not a thing, not in physics. So it's not any word that you can use as a subject or as a noun becomes, an object, not in physics. And again, the word object belongs to physics exclusively. Anyone using the word object trying to define it has stepped the line over into physics. And he says, Socrates is an object in the sense of something that exists and can be referred to in philosophical discourse. Absolutely not. Socrates is not an object, is not a thing. If Adam, the first man, if he's the only guy in the universe, right, and here comes the extraterrestrial and sees Adam, man, I think the word Adam means man, right? Then yes, Adam and man are synonyms, and you can use either word. You can call him X if you want, but you're referring to the object called man. But if you say this is Adam because that one is Johnny and the other one is Peter, now you're not talking about objects. Now you're talking about concept. You're making a relation. Same thing as the bikini. You're talking about comparisons. Whether you know it or not, you're comparing Adam against Peter against Johnny. Otherwise, Adam would be exactly like man, because he's the only man in the universe. Then you can say man, right? Point to it and say man. But if you're using the name of Adam, of this man, and you're saying this is Adam, well, why did you call him Adam? Oh, because there's Johnny and there's Peter and there's Paul. No. Then we have a problem, because now you're not talking about the object. You're not referring to the object. That's why Socrates is not an object, because Socrates, you're differentiating him from Plato or Aristotle. So you're saying that's Socrates. Why? Because the other guy, the guy I'm comparing him against, is someone else. So this one we call Socrates, this man we call Socrates, that man we call Plato. That's why Socrates is not a thing. Okay? Socrates is a comparison. It's a concept. And so because he doesn't have the right definition of what an object is, a thing is, he can't figure out exists. And he says a class of, for exists, right, definition, he says a class having one member. And he said, for example, a class of numbers. You got 2, 3, 4. Okay, you got several members. So if you have at least one member, like number 2, then it's a thing. But he says the null set, has nothing in it. So now that doesn't exist. And that's what he calls, I guess, empty space, because it's a null, nothing in it in that set. And what is a set? Something related to math. It's got nothing to do with physics or with the physical world. So again, these people use these words and they torture them. They really, kill them because they're misusing the words. And they mislead anyone who's listening to them. What are they referring to? And then you see, exists perception of reality. That's what exists is to him. It's got to do with the observer. What is your reality? Well, your reality is not my reality, so whatever exists for you doesn't exist for me. And so we don't know what the word exist means because it all depends on opinions. So if you're a quadriplegic, blind quadriplegic, you can't see or touch, right? You're out of touch with the world. So what happens? For you, the moon doesn't exist. You say, hold it, the moon is there. Of course it exists. But I don't see it, and I can't touch it, so it doesn't exist. And so for him it exists, for me it doesn't exist, or vice versa. For him it doesn't exist, for me it does exist. What do we understand about the word exist? And so no, we have to have a definition for the word exist that does not depend on opinions. Okay? And here we have good old Vsauce again, and he asked the question, do chairs exist? Listen to him.
What really exists? Do chairs exist?
Does he have an answer? Well, it's interesting that he goes through tons of stuff, tons of branches that they've created in so-called philosophy or ontology or metaphysics or whatever they call it in there, semantics, right? And look at all the categories he created. He's just gonna mention them, right? And listen to all the categories from this. He's gonna draw conclusions. So listen to all the categories here. These are just how they broke up philosophy or whatever they call it, ontology, metaphysics. Listen to him. Okay, here it is.
Ordinary objects. Constitution. Composition. Symbols. A donkey universe. It's a junkie universe. Ontological reductionism. Ontological realists. Ontological anti-realist. Mereological universalism. Eliminativism. Organicism. Mereological nihilism. Deflationism. Over-determination. Over-counting. A Sorites sequence. Stuff. The problem of the many. Ship of Theseus paradox. Ontologically innocent. A sortal sense. Application conditions. Ontologically parasitic. Object fixation. Property repression.
I hope you memorized all of them, okay? I'm not going to repeat them again. Okay, so after doing all this study of each one of these ones, and he explained each one, right? What does he come up with after doing all that? And these are his conclusions. This is what's so funny. Listen to his conclusions. Okay, here it goes.
You and I are not physical objects because we are not made of matter. Chairs and tables and rocks and buckets and people are not made of atoms. They are performed by atoms. We are disturbances in stuff, and none of it is us.
So you don't exist, you're not an object, you are a disturbance. So please don't disturb us. These are the conclusions these people arrive at after doing all this research for tens of thousands of years, at least since the days of the Greeks 2,000, 3,000 years ago. They come up with all this nonsense. They say, oh, I studied all this and I ended up concluding that you're not an object. Okay, you're a disturbance. Disturbance of what? The ether, maybe? I don't know. You're disturbing. You're very disturbed. Okay, that's what it is. And so, yeah, when you look at all this, you end up like this fellow, and he concluded, right, that we cannot know the universe. We cannot know what exists. We do not know anything. So stop investigating because we will never know. Listen to him. He says, ignoramus et ignorabimus. Okay, he says, we do not know, we shall not know. Okay? Scientific knowledge is limited. Humans will never discover what our universe is or how it works. Okay? He wrote that 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago. And the question is, was he right? I mean, here we have this infinite universe, and people say, it's impossible. We'll never figure it out because it's so infinite, so big. So people draw a conclusion from that it's impossible to understand the universe. And so all these physicists or whatever they're called, mathematicians, they'll never figure it out because it's just beyond human ability to figure out how this universe is, or what it is, or how it works. And so, getting back to God, does he exist? Here's good old God. He asks, do I exist? You had Descartes. He said, I think, therefore I am. And so the question, God simply exists because he thinks? I mean, what are we talking about here? And yeah, this is the problem with atheism and all this. The scientific method is... they're using the mathematical method instead of the scientific method. Once we use the scientific method, we reach a totally different conclusion. And all we had to do all these years is define our terms so people can understand the theory that you are proposing. Okay, so let's do that. Here it is. We start this by mentioning there's only two branches of science. One is known as physics, the other one is philosophy. There are no other branches. Either it fits under one or the other category. And that's what science is. Science, rational explanations. Physics, of causes and mechanisms. Philosophy, of reasons and purposes. Now we have definitions we can sink our teeth into. We can take this to the bank. Okay, we have a definition for science, for physics, and for philosophy. The only two branches of science. Okay, that's our starting point. Do you agree? We don't care. We don't care. If you got a better mousetrap, present it. Don't tell me that I'm wrong. Tell me what's right. Okay, that's the way it works. Don't just say, I don't agree with you, Bill. In science, we do not agree, and we do not agree to disagree. In science, you present, and the other guy either accepts what you're presenting, or he has a better mousetrap. He proposes something in exchange. That's the way it works. And you have to defend your own, with sword and shield. You have to defend your ideas with sword and shield, and your definitions and so on. Objects that you propose and so on. Okay, so what are the foundations of physics? Well, here it is. Foundations of physics. The golden principle of physics, you can't do physics without an object. You can't do it the mathematical way. They do it with action at a distance. Action at a distance is the mathematical term for what? Witchcraft and black magic. What they're doing is voodoo physics. You pinch the doll and the other guy gets hurt. He gets the pinch here. How did he do it? Don't tell me it was done by remote control. Tell me what the mechanism is. Okay? Otherwise, it's magic. And so, yeah, we had to define these terms. These form the foundations of physics. And there you see the word object, especially that which has shape. And the other important one is the word exists, right? Almost at the bottom there. And it's physical presence, an object that has location. Once we have that, now we can make sense. We can talk to people about our theories. Okay, and again, you don't agree with those definitions that you see there? No problem. Just come up with definitions that you believe should be there instead of those, okay? Because those are the words that you're going to use. You're going to use the word object, and you're going to use the word exist every time you give a physical presentation of physics, okay? If you're going to tell us a theory, your theory, whatever your theory is, you're going to undoubtedly treat something as an object, and you're going to talk about its existence, because physics is the science of existence. Physics only deals with objects, in fact, with 3D objects. Okay, so what we do is we present the universal movie. Okay, and there you have the static concepts at the top: object, distance, location, and existence. There are a few more, but those are the main ones. And at the bottom, you have dynamic concepts, just examples. The ones at the bottom require at least 2 frames of the movie, as you can see the grayish area there. The ones at the top only fit in a single frame. Okay, so in a single frame, there is no motion. You want to see motion, you need at least 2 frames of the universal movie. This is the tool we use to kill anyone who talks about motion or time. Okay, you only have existence within a single frame. Nothing moves, no electron moves, no photon moves, nothing moves there. You want to see a photon move, you want to see an electron move, you got to go at least 2 frames. Okay, otherwise you have no motion. Is this what we have out there in the real world? So what do you want me to do? You want me to take you outside and prove to you that I can stop time, and then I can show you everything in there and say, look, see, I've stopped the universe. There's no more time, no more motion? No. This is not something you go out there and prove and present evidence, because it's a conceptual issue. And some of these dummies, especially the etherists, they don't understand that. They say, oh, but everything moves, or like Galileo said when they said, the earth doesn't move, says, por si muove. Por si muove, he said. But it moves. Yeah, not in the universal movie. A single frame, nothing moves. Okay, so it's a conceptual issue, and it's so that we stop all that motion that's rattling your brain. We need to stop the universe, that stopwatch, and stop the universe and say what's in a single frame of the universal movie without there being any motion. And so you'll see water there, you'll see air there, all the objects. People say, well, is water an object and is air an object? Well, it's constantly moving. Well, so am I. I'm moving, so I'm not an object because I move. The table must be moving also, with respect to Jupiter every second of the day. So that does mean that a table's not an object because it's moving? No, a table is an object because, we designate it as, when we point to it, and say table, we're treating it as if it's standing still forever, for eternity. Nothing in the universe moves. You're just pointing to the table that's not moving with respect to anything because it's in a single frame of the universal movie. And the same thing we do with air. That blob of atoms there, of molecules, that's called air. And that blob of water, that's called water. That's the way it works. Should be in a single frame. Okay, so once we have that, we say, well, what do we propose? And this is an assumption. It's known as a hypothesis. You make assumptions of the object that is out there in the universe. And we're saying our universe is very simple, the easiest thing, the simplest universe that Father Universe could make, or Mother Nature, or God, or the devil, one of those guys. This is the universe. It's a single thread. That's all there is ultimately out there. Okay, so this single thread, right? It's a closed loop thread, and it builds every atom and the interconnecting entities. We'll call it a rope, okay? That interconnects every atom. So if we were to start at any atom or at any one of these ropes, as I call it, electromagnetic ropes, and just take it all around the universe, we would eventually end up where we started because it's a closed loop thread. This thread builds every atom and the interconnections, the mediators that connect every atom, every 2 atoms. And here you have it. It's the single thread hypothesis, okay? It's 3D. It's not 1D, 2D, 0D. It can't be because imagine 2D. As soon as you have a 2D, let's assume that was 2D, right? A flat ribbon of some kind. Well, as soon as it moves in any direction, now it's moving into third dimension. So now you have 3D no matter what. And again, you cannot conceptualize a 2D anything because 2D is always a part of the 3D world. Okay, so 2D is a subset of 3D. And 1D doesn't exist, neither does 0D exist. Okay. So everything is 3D out there, including this thread, just so thin and so long that people say, well, it must be 2D or 1D or 0D. No, it's 3D, but at a scale, unimaginable scale. Okay, so this is an elementary fundamental entity. What do we mean by that? It's not made of parts. That's what we mean. It's made out of a single piece. Okay, it's unimaginably thin, and it's indivisible. It doesn't have parts. It's not made out of atoms. It's not made out of little particles. It's a single piece. Okay, we got that? And it's malleable, okay, and it's unbreakable, uncuttable. It's invisible and intangible, so don't try to run an experiment to try to see it. This is a conceptual issue completely, okay? And it goes through itself, it goes through objects, and so on. It doesn't understand what touch is. Okay? Touch essentially becomes our version of touch, our macro world of touch. It's a it's a what do you call it? Something that's built. There's a word for it. I just escaped my mind. Anyways, it's something that what is the word? that you have to have many threads in order to have touch. No? Okay? So it's emergent. That's the word I was looking for. It's an emergent property. Touch is an emergent, at our level, at our macro level, is an emergent property of this. But it doesn't mean that this thread started out as a single thread and then turned into all the atoms. It's always been atoms, interconnected atoms. We work it in reverse. If we were to unravel every atom, every interconnection, mediator that connects every two atoms, then we would arrive at a single thread. That's the way it works. But it's a conceptual issue. It's not like, show me that you can unravel the atom, unravel the rope. No, it doesn't work that way. We're not going to go to the lab to prove it to you. Okay? The way it works is, you have to imagine that if you start at a given point, you're going to go all around the universe through every atom, every interconnecting rope, and you're going to end up at your starting point. And here it is. This is what we're proposing. Again, these are the assumptions. You start at the single thread, okay? And again, it's not like we're going to prove this or run it in the lab or anything. This is a conceptual issue so that you understand, only because of that. And so if we go from the single thread, you can see how it tangles with itself, eventually builds all the atoms and the interconnections, and there you see the main proposal, which is two atoms bound by what we call the electromagnetic rope. And as the atoms pump back and forth, they torque the rope, and that torsion is known as light. Okay, can we unravel the atom? Can we unravel the rope and go in the other direction and end up with a single closed loop thread? The answer is no. That's only a conceptual. You can conceptualize it, but you don't ask me to go out there and prove it to you. We're not going to go to the lab to prove this because it's, again, a conceptual issue only. And those people who don't understand that, well, I can't help them any further. Okay, and yeah, here's gravity. You have a spoon, it falls to the floor. Okay, and you ask, well, why does it fall to the floor? Well, because every atom of that spoon is connected to every atom on Earth. And you can see what's happening to the ropes that interconnect those atoms. They fan out as the spoon approaches the center of the planet, the center of gravity. That's what's happening. That's why a spoon falls to the floor. So we have an explanation of physical interpretation based on the fact that all atoms are physically interconnected. And yes, once we see that, we say, well, we live in a very, very extremely simple universe. Okay, we have space, which is nothing. What is nothing? That which has no shape. We have the something, which are those things that have shape. In other words, that which has shape versus that which doesn't have shape. So we have all these atoms interconnected by electromagnetic ropes. Think of it like this. You know, my fists are two atoms and they're connected by a rope. A lot thinner than this, right? But I guess you get the idea. And all atoms in the universe are physically interconnected. And if we were to unravel them, then we would end up with a closed loop thread. That's the proposal. That's for you to understand and to take and sleep on it, and you arrive at your own conclusions. Do you believe in the theory? Do you believe in the hypothesis? Do you believe in what I just said? We don't care. Science doesn't care. Okay? Science only explains so that you understand, you get an idea, take it home, crunch it, munch it, and reach your own conclusions.